In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. The Imperium of mankind staggers upon the precipice of extinction, beleaguered across thousands of battlefronts. From the eastern reaches, tyrannid hordes descend like ravenous locusts, consuming all living matter in their inexorable advance. To the north, the Great Rift tears reality asunder, unleashing chaos's unrelenting fury upon worlds once touched by serenity. Orcs breed without restraint throughout contested territories, transforming every battlefield into grotesque festival of carnage. Deep beneath the crust of countless worlds, Necron legions stir from their million-year slumber, reclaiming what they deem eternally theirs. Humanity withers. Each passing hour witnesses millions perishing. Worlds burn to ash. Star systems vanish from existence. The Emperor of mankind persists upon his golden throne, a corpse maintaining awareness through sheer will alone, his form ravaged by 10,000 years of unimaginable torment. Yet the Astronomican's beacon still gleams, that solitary light piercing infinite darkness. This is mankind's age of despair, or so they believe. Yet despair holds meaning only to those who have never truly known it. There exists a race that comprehends hopelessness far more intimately, a civilization more ancient than the Imperium itself, older than the very chaos gods now ravaging reality. A species that once ruled galaxies, not through conquest, but through simple precedence. They existed before all else. The Aeldari, children of the stars. Look upon them now, not in their lost magnificence, but in their present decay. Colossal craftworlds drift through the void like dying leviathans, each a miniaturized world carved from wraithbone, a living substance crystallized from pure spiritual essence, pale as bone yet luminous as moonlight. From distance, their beauty seems almost unreal. Spires soar impossibly skyward, architectural curves so delicate they appear to defy physical law. Soft radiance filters through winding thoroughfares, casting elongated shadows across walls inscribed with countless years of devotion. Draw closer. Observe the silence. Vast corridors stretch empty. Palaces that once thrummed with billions now echo only occasional footsteps. Hanging gardens wither untended. The Aeldari suffer no shortage of space. Rather, they lack sufficient population to occupy it. Each craft world once housed billions. Now some contain merely millions, others fewer still. The numbers hemorrhage perpetually, each day, each year, never ascending, only descending. For every Aeldari death represents irreplaceable catastrophe. Unlike humans who breed prolifically, Aeldari require decades merely achieving maturity. Each life embodies repositories of irreplaceable knowledge, experience accumulated across centuries or millennia. When one falls, they carry with them wisdom that can never be recovered. They are a civilization where every remaining individual can be counted by name. Yet not all Aeldari dwell upon craftworlds. Certain have embraced a darker path, crueler, more terrible, yet possessing twisted honesty. These dwell within Comorra, the black city concealed deep within the Webway's depths, where genuine starlight never penetrates. The Drukhari, the dark kin. Those who abandoned Craftworld's ascetic disciplines, instead choosing to sustain themselves upon others' suffering, they strike from shadow, enslave, torture, drawing vitality from agony itself. Not from inherent malice, rather from grim necessity. But before exploring their path further, understand what they truly are. An Aeldari represents something approaching biological apotheosis. They tower above humans with preternatural grace, their forms geometric perfection itself. Skin gleams pale as ivory. Eyes contain only depths of black or cold hues, sapphire or jade. Ears extend sharp and elegant. Fingers possess dexterity humanity can never attain. Their lifespans stretch near immortal, barring violence. An Aeldari might persist thousands of years, sometimes far longer. Not through gradual aging, but through simple biological refusal to degenerate as lesser species do. They mature slowly, live extensively, and when death finally arrives, it comes through violence or extraordinary circumstance, never natural decay. Their physical prowess transcends human capability dramatically. An Aeldari warrior moves faster than human eyes can follow, reflexes operating at velocities, permitting them to dodge projectiles after they discharge by simply reading the shooter's intent. Each motion flows as dance, each strike as artwork. Where humans triumph through strength and determination, Aeldari dominate through precision and absolute speed. Yet their true dominion lies not within flesh, it dwells within spirit. Every Aeldari channels psychic power to some degree. Not all possess sufficient might to warp reality or immolate enemies through thought alone, yet all sense the warp, all touch the currents of spiritual energy. Some become far-seers, seers who perceive destiny's myriad threads, reading futures as one reads written page. Others become warlocks, fusing combat prowess with sorcery into lethal artistry without parallel. And their perception, this defines their true nature. Aeldari perceive reality at resolution far exceeding human capability. Colors burn impossibly vivid, sounds resonate with extraordinary richness, tastes possess bewildering complexity. A painting humans find lovely might reduce Aeldari to tears or appear utterly worthless. Music humans treasure might assault their senses as unbearable noise. They inhabit a sensory dimension humanity cannot fathom, and emotions. This represents both their greatest gift and deepest curse. Aeldari experience emotional intensities hundreds of times exceeding human capacity. When they love, they burn with passion, consuming the soul itself. When they hate, their enmity can persist across millennia. When they suffer, the anguish threatens madness. Every experience exists at extreme intensity. This demands discipline, control, adherence to the path, rigid frameworks of restraint, preventing emotional overwhelm. Because they comprehend what occurs without such safeguards, they have witnessed it, and the consequences pursue them still. Aeldari intellect ranks among the universe's keenest. They contemplate multidimensionally, perceiving patterns beyond human recognition. They learn with startling rapidity, retain knowledge indefinitely, and can achieve mastery in virtually any pursuit following centuries of dedication. An Aeldari warrior might possess combat experience exceeding entire Space Marine chapters' histories. A Farseer might have studied the warp longer than humanity has existed. Yet, despite possessing such power, such apparent perfection, they harbor a terrible flaw woven into their very nature: pride. Aeldari regard other species as vermin. Humanity they call Mon-K, filthy beasts, short-lived, crude and barbarous. Even Space Marines, the Imperium's most formidable warriors, appear mere crude implements compared to aspect warriors. Orcs constitute savage brutes. Tau represent naive children misusing incomprehensible technology, and Necrons, complexity surrounds Necrons, for they represent the sole civilization ever having defeated the Aeldari in antiquity. The Aeldari once ruled galaxies when humanity's ancestors clambered through trees on Terra. They maintained dominion for millions of years in unprecedented glory. Within their ancient memories, all other species appear as mere interlopers, trespassers upon a galaxy rightfully theirs. Yet pride itself sowed catastrophe's seeds. They believed themselves too perfect to fail. They trusted their intellect and power transcended all limitation. They were catastrophically, irrevocably wrong. Aeldari technology surpasses the Imperium's by tens of thousands of years. Whilst humanity clings to archaic Dark Age devices they no longer comprehend manufacturing, Aeldari possess complete mastery of their creations. Wraithbone, living substance crystallized from spiritual essence, rivals diamond's hardness, yet weighs less than feathers. Reshapeable through Bonesiger's will, entire craftworlds emerge from this miraculous material. It represents not mere matter, it is spirituality made manifest. Their weapons unite elegance with devastating lethality. Shuriken catapults discharge hundreds of monomolecular discs per second. So thin, they perforate armor as easily as blades penetrate skin. Power weapons crackle with azure luminescence, surrounded by energy matrices capable of bisecting steel like parchment. Nothing crude exists within their arsenals. Each weapon constitutes masterwork, crafted by artisans having devoted centuries perfecting their craft. Their mastery of the psychic arts stands unrivaled throughout creation. Whilst the Imperium psychers struggle desperately against warp corruption, Aeldari sculpt the immaterial as artists carve marble. They bend reality with sophistication humanity never approached. A Farseer perceives the future not as single thread, but as countless interwoven possibilities, then selects optimal trajectory. A Warlock summons lightning from bare atmosphere, conjures infernos from nothingness, or simply tears an enemy's consciousness asunder through sheer will. Then there exists the Webway itself, an interdimensional network transcending normal space, permitting instantaneous transit between distant worlds. Humanity must rely upon warp travel, hurling vessels into damnation and praying Geller fields endure. Each journey represents existential gamble. Temporal distortions wreck calendars. A voyage might consume weeks or centuries unpredictably. Daemonic predators stalk those passages. Travelers risk becoming eternally lost within the Immaterium. Aeldari require no such suffering. They possess the Webway, Old One's legacy maintained and expanded across millions of years. Within those pathways, no temporal anomalies manifest, no demon waits. Only luminous corridors traverse dimensional gulfs, connecting worlds separated by light years into hours-long journeys. Safe, instantaneous, absolute. Yet despite such overwhelming advantages, Aeldari remain no allies to mankind. They are neither entirely enemies nor genuine friends. Relations between Imperium and Aeldari fluctuate perpetually, dictated by circumstance and Farseer calculation. Today, one craftworld fights alongside space marines against chaos. Tomorrow, that very same craftworld might execute them from behind to secure their own objectives. Aeldari readily sacrifice entire human worlds, billions of souls, to preserve single craftworlds. They will destroy millions of humans to save one Aeldari, not from inherent cruelty, rather because such mathematics seem simple within their perspective. One Aeldari, living thousands of years, carrying irreplaceable knowledge, possesses exponentially greater value than millions of easily replaced humans surviving mere decades. Farseers perceive further than humanity ever could. They recognize destiny's interwoven threads, comprehend consequence chains beyond mortal cognition. Actions appearing senseless today might prevent catastrophe a century hence. Betrayals now might preserve entire civilizations in futures yet unwritten. Their decisions seem irrational, merciless, incomprehensible to human minds. Yet within Aeldari consciousness, these represent necessary moves within destiny's eternal game. And overshadowing everything exists one inescapable curse: Slaanesh, she who thirsts, the fourth and darkest god of chaos itself. Every Aeldari lives beneath this demon's unending hunger, not figuratively, literally. Each moment of existence, they sense Slaanesh's insatiable appetite. This god was birthed from Aeldari decadence itself, nurtured by trillions of Aeldari souls during the galaxy's most cataclysmic instant. Now Slaanesh hungers for them eternally. When humans perish, their souls might drift through the warp, find unity with the Emperor, or simply cease. When Aeldari die, only one fate awaits. The soul gets dragged screaming into the warp where Slaanesh waits. Infinite torment, not ending, but beginning. Torture, dismemberment, consumption within agony, never concluding. Aeldari souls burn too brilliantly, taste too exquisite for Slaanesh's appetite. This god will devour them across eternities, savor by savor, never permitting true death, extending suffering infinitely. This explains spirit stones, gems embedded within their armor, designed to capture souls upon death. Should an Aeldari perish whilst their stone remains intact, the soul becomes imprisoned within rather than dragged into the warp. That stone then returns to the Craftworld, attached to the Infinity Circuit, an eternal network where ancestors persist, remain aware, continue communication with the living. This explains why Drukhari must sustain themselves through others' anguish. Each Drukhari experiences constant drain from Slaanesh hourly. For survival, they must compensate by absorbing suffering, torturing slaves, orchestrating arena executions, inflicting pain through every conceivable means. Without this, they wither, age, their souls consumed by Slaanesh while still alive. This explains why rest never comes, why death never brings peace. Every Aeldari comprehends that death is not ending, merely the commencement of true hell, unless fortune grants them death with intact stone. Why relate this narrative? Understanding the present demands comprehending the past. To grasp why Aeldari fight so fiercely, why they calculate so coldly, why they prove so terribly ruthless, one must understand what they have lost. Their story ranks among the most tragic within Warhammer 40,000's cosmos. From zenith of absolute glory, ruling unchallenged galaxies, to absolute nadir of despair. A meditation upon arrogance, a commentary upon perfection's price. A testament to how all light eventually gutters. A lesson even the Imperium should embrace, though perhaps it never shall. This is not a narrative of heroes conquering, not virtue triumphing over vice, rather a chronicle of immeasurable loss. The plunge from blinding radiance into absolute darkness. Existence within despair when everything has perished. Fighting when victory becomes impossible, only delaying extinction another night. Whence did they originate? Who shaped them? How mighty did they ascend? What transpired? How did perfection orchestrate annihilation? How do they endure now? Upon Craftworlds, within Comorra's abyss, upon distant maiden worlds selected as refuge. Does hope yet remain? This is the story demanding recitation, from genesis to conclusion, from radiance to shadow, from the war in heaven before they existed, through the greatest empire creation ever witnessed, unto the fall, that apocalyptic moment shattering everything. And finally, unto now, where they persist still, fighting, existing, hoping for final salvation. Sit, listen as rain drums gently beyond. Permit the children of starlight's tragic tale to unfold. To comprehend the Aeldari, one must journey backward through time itself, to epochs preceding even their genesis. Back when the stars burned young, when the galaxy had not yet assumed its present configuration, back to an age whose history was not inscribed in ink or data, but survives only through Harlequin theatrical recitations, through faded memories etched upon the most ancient wraithbone. This is the legend of the War in Heaven, a conflict between gods, a struggle whose reverberations still echo throughout the galaxy unto this very day. And like all legends, time has obscured truth. Countless tellings have warped the narrative. Yet even through mythology's mist, the essential contours remain discernible, and they inspire profound dread. Before the war in heaven, before conflict erupted, three powers shaped galactic destiny itself. First existed the Old Ones, the primordial ancients within Aeldari legend. Various accounts describe them differently. Some claim they were colossal beings, ancient amphibian-like creatures with intellect transcending all measurement. Others suggest they possessed no fixed form, capable of altering their bodies at will. Yet all versions concur upon one essential truth. The Old Ones represented the galaxy's primordial voyagers, the first sentience comprehending the secrets of space and time, of warp and material reality alike. They opened the Webway. According to Aeldari tradition, the Old Ones themselves constructed this network of dimensional corridors, pathways traversing reality's hidden folds, where distance became meaningless. This was not crude warp travel, not hurling vessels into damnation and praying for survival. The Webway represented something far more elegant, far safer, infinitely more controlled. An architectural marvel existing beyond the Immaterium's chaotic currents. The second power was not divine, but mortal, the Necron tier, a physical species born beneath the radiation of savage stars. Their homeworld bathed in deadly emanations, condemning them to abbreviated, agonized existences. They endured perpetual suffering, skin ulcerating, cells destroying themselves, death an ever-present shadow. Yet from such torment emerged technological genius of staggering sophistication. They mastered material science as few species ever could. They constructed empires spanning star systems, and they regarded the Old Ones with hatred intermingled with envy. For the Old Ones possessed what Necrontia could never achieve. Near immortal lifespans, mastery over the warp itself, freedom from radiation's unending torment. The Necrontia petitioned the Old Ones for the secrets of longevity. When refused, for reasons only the Old Ones understood, despair transformed into seething resentment, a hatred festering across centuries, nourished by agony and desperation. The third power was neither race nor civilization, rather pure manifestations of energy itself. The C'tan, the yin-gear within certain legends, star-born entities. Initially, they merely drifted as clouds of consciousness through the void, sustaining themselves upon stellar radiation. No physical form, no discernible purpose, merely primordial life forms existing within vast emptiness, consuming starlight as single-celled organisms consume nutrients, until they tasted something more delicious, the essence of living flesh. Various accounts recount this narrative differently. Some claim the Necrontia sought out the C'tan, beseeching power to challenge the Old Ones. Others suggest the C'tan themselves were drawn by the Necrontyrs' hatred, an emotion so intense that even beings of pure energy sensed its resonance. But the outcome remained identical. The C'tan were given physical forms, bodies crafted from necrodermis, a living metal capable of self-repair, eternally incorruptible. For the first time, the star-born entities possessed material substance. They became vast, terrifying, supreme. Each C'tan constituted a god in the truest sense, capable of shattering worlds, bending gravity itself, manipulating time and space through pure physics. And in exchange, they promised the Necrontyr that which they desired most profoundly: immortality itself. Biotransference, the transformation of flesh to essence. This moment marked the ending of Necrontyr and the beginning of Necrons. Imagine it, if your mind permits such horror. Trillions of Necrontyr, each carrying the agony of a body deteriorating slowly, were promised liberation. They were led into colossal engines, vast living forges. Within those chambers, their consciousness, awareness, memory, personality was ripped from organic flesh and transferred into metallic skeletal frames. Yet this transformation proved far from perfect. Not gentle transition, but violent rupture. Each Necrontyr who entered was a living being possessed of emotion, hope, aspiration. Each Necron who emerged was machinery haunted by fragmentary memories of having once been alive. Most common warriors lost virtually all individuality. They became shambling metal corpses, obeying commands with mechanical precision, their memories of family, companionship, or anything constituting their humanity erased completely. The leadership, overlords, cryptechs, retained more, yet they too sacrificed something irreplaceable. Emotion became distant, empathy vanished entirely. Only cold intellect and eternal ambition remained. And what was abandoned, the actual souls, the spiritual essence incapable of digitization into metal, the C'tan consumed ravenously. Trillions of Necrontyr souls became sustenance for the star gods. They swelled, grew more powerful than ever, nourished by an entire civilization's vital essence. And then the war in heaven commenced in earnest. Necrons, with immortal bodies, guided by omnipotent C'tan, poured across the galaxy. They did not fight like other species. They required no logistics, no supplies. A destroyed Necron simply reconstituted itself, metal frame repairing autonomously. If damage proved too severe, they were transported back to tomb ships for restoration. They never tired, never felt fear, never hesitated. The Old Ones recognized they confronted an enemy unconquerable through raw power alone. The Necrons possessed infinite legions. The C'tan wielded godlike authority. What response could the Old Ones devise? They created living weapons. Aeldari legend recounts that the Old Ones themselves crafted, or at minimum, significantly enhanced, numerous psycho-capable species. The ability to touch the warp and weaponize it, the Aeldari represented one such creation, perhaps the most carefully engineered, most refined, most formidable. Because the Necrons possessed a fundamental weakness. They harbored no souls. They could not touch the warp. Spiritual power represented something utterly alien, incomprehensible to them. And the C'tan, despite their omnipotence, were purely physical entities. The warp remained an impenetrable domain to them. Therefore, the Old Ones forged warriors capable of fighting simultaneously upon both fronts, physical and spiritual. The Aeldari were born with blazing souls, with instinctive perception and command of the warp. They move with grace, possessed adaptive fluidity, could utilize the webway to traverse between battlefields instantaneously, and most critically, they could strike Necrons in ways metal could never defend against, through psyche flame, through pure warp force itself. The war persisted across innumerable millennia. The entire galaxy became a theater of conflict. Worlds burned to slag. Stars were torn asunder by C'tan, feeding upon them for energy. Regions of space warped so catastrophically that reality itself commenced fracturing, and the warp, that invisible ocean of emotion and spirituality, began poisoning itself. Because warfare generates emotion, terror, hatred, despair. Trillions perished in agony, each death a scream reverberating through the warp. The warp, once a relatively tranquil sea of spiritual energy, commenced boiling violently. Currents began manifesting. Entities commenced coalescing from pure emotion itself. This was how the first Chaos Gods began awakening. Not through conscious will, rather because warfare itself nourished them, gave them form, gifted them purpose. Yet even within that chaos, the balance gradually shifted. Not because the Old Ones achieved victory, rather because the Necrons comprehended a terrible truth. The Khan had deceived them. The immortality they were promised was not true immortality. They had surrendered all that rendered existence worthwhile. No taste of food remained, no sensation of sunlight upon skin, no joy, no sorrow, no love, no hope, only cold existence within metal bodies, serving the very gods who had consumed their civilization's collective soul. And certain Necrons, those retaining sufficient consciousness to remember their past, began formulating plans. Betrayal was executed swiftly and without mercy. Necrons turned upon the very deities they once served, and this time they fought not to drive the C'tan away. They fought to shatter them completely. The C'tan, despite their omnipotence, proved not invulnerable. They could be wounded, and the Necrons had spent countless millennia studying these entities' fundamental nature. They knew the weaknesses. They knew how to strike. A C'tan could not be killed entirely. They represented fundamental aspects of reality itself, woven from existence's essential structure. Yet they could be broken, could be fragmented into components. And that was precisely what the Necrons accomplished. They shattered the C'tan into countless Satan shards, fragments of divinity, each retaining partial power yet incapable of independent action. These shards became imprisoned within energy cages, transformed into living weapons for Necron deployment. Gods, once commanding Necrons, became slaves to those who had once been enslaved to them. Only scattered C'tan shards remained free, concealed within the galaxy's darkest corners, diminished and terrified. Yet this victory arrived far too late. The Old Ones had vanished. Some accounts claim they perished in the war, others that they withdrew into alternate dimensions, still others that they simply disappeared, leaving no trace whatsoever. The warp remained catastrophically damaged beyond recovery. Spiritual tempests, now perpetual threats. And the Necrons, exhausted after millions of years of conflict, determined that the moment for rest had arrived. They descended into their tomb worlds, vast underground mausoleums constructed deep within planetary cores. They initiated hibernation protocols, waiting until the galaxy recovered, until younger species matured, until the hour came to awaken and reclaim the galaxy they believed eternally theirs. And once the storms subsided, once the ashes of the war in heaven settled, the galaxy entered an entirely new epoch. The Old Ones had departed. The C'tan lay shattered. The Necrons slumbered. And the Aeldari, those warriors created specifically for the primordial conflict, suddenly found themselves standing within an empty galaxy. They inherited the Webway, that ancient network constructed by the Old Ones. And with it came the capacity for unfettered galactic travel, unobstructed by distance or temporal distortion. They inherited technology, knowledge, and most critically, no rival sufficiently powerful to challenge them. Other species remained primitive. Orcs constituted merely savage beasts. What would eventually become humanity still evolved upon a distant world, yet ignorant of fire itself. No Imperium existed, no Space Marines, no Emperor. Only the Aeldari. And before them stretched the entire galaxy, vast and boundless, awaiting their command. They commenced construction. Not an empire built upon conquest or violence, rather a civilization founded upon artistry, knowledge, and absolute perfection. They possessed time itself, thousands of years, millions of years. They possessed technology, the Old One's legacy. They possessed the Webway, safe passage across the cosmos. And gradually, across countless millennia, they constructed something unprecedented and never again to be repeated. A perfect empire. A civilization where art and science became singular, where warfare and aesthetics intertwined inseparably, where every citizen represented living masterwork. But within that blazing radiance, within such absolute perfection, a seed had been planted. A seed they would not recognize until far too late. Because when all things achieve perfection, when nothing remains to conquer, when all desires find satisfaction, beings, whether human or Aeldari, commence seeking something else, something novel, something stimulating, something dangerous. And within the warp, still ravaged from the war in heaven, something commenced stirring. An entity not yet born, yet gradually forming, nourished not by the war's ancient emotions, fear, hatred, despair, but by something new, something intoxicating, decadence, obsession, unbridled indulgence. And when it finally awakened, the galaxy would never be the same. There exist certain narratives, inscribed not in ink, not recorded within books, nor carved upon stone. Rather, they persist through alternative means, through the Harlequin's ritualistic dances beneath alien stars, through songs chanted during primordial ceremonies, through faded imagery etched upon the most ancient wraithbone. These constitute accounts of Genesis itself, moments when the Aeldari possessed no formal designation, when they existed merely as consciousness within the minds of forces older than time itself. Before history was chronicled through conventional documentation, before campaigns and dynasties could be enumerated, only mythology persisted. And within that mythology, the Aeldari discovered themselves. This represents no demonstrable truth, not verifiable data, rather what the Aeldari believed, or once believed, during epochs preceding catastrophe. This constitutes their self-comprehension, their understanding of their distinction, their justification for possessing gifts no other species attained, and each gift carried an accompanying price. According to legends recounted by Harlequins across countless generations, the Aeldari did not arise spontaneously. They were a species engineered with purpose, though who established that purpose remains obscured within temporal mists. Certain accounts claim the Old Ones crafted them as living weapons during the war in heaven. Others recount they evolved naturally, yet were selected and blessed by divine entities. Still more ancient legends simply proclaim they were Starlight's children, born from luminescence and shadow, from warp and matter intertwined, yet all versions concur upon singular truth. The Aeldari were birthed already containing something extraordinary, something perilous. They were a species inherently spiritual, unlike most other races, where psychic capability represented rarity or mutation. Every Aeldari possessed a soul blazing brilliantly within the warp. From inception, they connected with the Immaterium's currents in ways other species required decades of discipline merely approaching, if they achieved it whatsoever. They experienced emotions more intensely, perceived reality at superior resolution, and their souls emanated warp light like torches piercing endless night. This constituted simultaneously blessing and curse, for a blazing soul meant tremendous capacity. Capacity to perceive futures, capacity to warp reality itself, capacity to create artistry and warfare at levels transcending all comparison. Yet it also signified vulnerability, susceptibility to temptation, proclivity towards surrendering to desire until reaching extreme extremities. The Aeldari regarded themselves as children of starlight, not literally, but poetically, symbolically. They believed themselves crafted to generate beauty, to comprehend mysteries other species could never access. They regarded younger civilizations, what would eventually become humanity, the Tau, and countless lesser species, as clumsy children fumbling with incomprehensible objects. This arrogance was woven into their very creation mythology, and within the most ancient narratives existed their pantheon. The Aeldari's pantheon differed fundamentally from humanity's deities. They were not distant entities commanding from heavenly thrones. According to tradition, the Aeldari gods once walked amongst their people, traversed worlds, loved and hated, and fought as genuinely living beings. Perhaps they represented merely the most powerful Aeldari of antiquity, elevated to divinity through temporal passage. Perhaps they were warp entities crystallized from collective faith. Perhaps they were genuinely divine. None can state with certainty. Yet within pre-fall Aeldari consciousness, they were utterly real. Foremost and most supreme stood Asuryan, the Phoenix King, Pantheon's ultimate authority. Asuryan represented order's pillar, maintaining equilibrium amongst the other gods. Legend recounts that Asuryan himself established the boundary between divine and mortal, a decision subsequent deities resented bitterly. Asuryan gifted the Aeldari wisdom and introspection, the capacity to gaze inward and discover strength. He embodied the eternally reborn flame. Each time a phoenix perished and re-emerged from ashes, represented Asuryan's essence. The Phoenix Lords, the Aeldari's greatest warriors across subsequent ages, derived their designation from this deity. They were beings who died and lived repeatedly across generations, their consciousness transmitted through armor and weapons from successor to successor. This constituted Asuryan's legacy. Resurrection, continuity, will never extinguished. Yet Asuryan remained distant, not easily approached. And within the pantheon existed gods more intimately touching Aeldari hearts. Isha, the mother of all living, numbered amongst them. According to tradition, Isha granted the Aeldari fertility, abundance, and vital essence flowing perpetually. She embodied spring personified, rebirth following winter, hope persisting even within despair. Ancient accounts recount that Isha loved her people with such profound intensity that she wept observing their suffering. Her tears fell upon earth and transformed into flowers, grew into forests, became life itself. Beside Isha stood Kurnus, the hunter. Kurnus represented wilderness divinized. He was the one bearing bow and arrows, racing through primordial forests, incarnate hunting instinct, the natural cycle of predation and death. Legend recounts that Cernus and Isha were paired consorts, and their union generated equilibrium between civilization and instinct, between nurturing and predation. And from them emerged Lilith, the Maiden of Dreams. Lilith constituted the pantheon's youngest, most pure entity. She embodied unformed dreams, futures yet unwritten, fragile hope. Certain accounts identify her as Isha and Cernus's daughter. Others describe her as an independent entity symbolizing the purity the Aeldari once possessed before corruption. Lilith became associated with prophecy, perceiving futures through nebulous dreams, indistinct revelations. Later, Farseers frequently petitioned Lilith, seeking her guidance as they navigated intertwined destiny threads. Yet, not all Pantheon members possessed gentleness and purity. Morai Heg, the crone of fate, represented amongst the Pantheon's darkest aspects. If Lilith embodied obscure futures filled with hope, Morai Heg represented futures merciless and inescapable. She wove destiny itself, perceiving all pathways and comprehending death awaiting each conclusion. Legend recounts that Morai Heg granted the Aeldari prophecy's gift, capacity to perceive approaching futures. But like all gifts within Aeldari mythology, it carried an accompanying price. For perceiving futures meant witnessing tragedy rushing toward you which you cannot prevent. It meant shouldering knowledge's burden. Comprehending those you cherish will perish, understanding your efforts will fail, yet persisting nonetheless because that soul pathway remains traversable. And Morai Heg left an additional legacy. A legacy destined to grow monumentally important within distant futures. The Crone's Words. 5 blades crafted from her own finger bones. According to legend, these swords represented more than mere weaponry. They were destiny's keys, essential components required completing some grand ritual, a ritual that, eventually, after the fall, after everything collapsed, would become the Inari's ultimate hope, those seeking to awaken Inaid, the Aeldari's god of death itself. Yet during the mythological epoch, the Croneswords constituted mere symbolism, reminders that even gods themselves could be sacrificed, and from such sacrifice emerged power. And then existed Kaine, a deity no Aeldari could deny or forget. Kayla Mensha Kaine, the bloody-handed god. Kaine represented warfare, pure and uncomplicated, not idealized conflict or noble purpose, rather warfare as primal force, violence, destruction, rage consuming everything in its path. Legend recounts that Kaine murdered Eldanesh, amongst the Aeldari's greatest ancient heroes, in righteous fury. And from that moment, his hands remained eternally bloodstained. Asuryan punished Kaine by shattering him into countless fragments, scattering these across the galaxy. And from those shattered pieces emerged the avatars of Kain, incarnations of the war god summoned within Craftworlds when warfare approached. Each avatar constituted a colossal being of molten iron, standing nearly 10 meters elevated, bearing the great wailing doom, an enormous sword eternally dripping blood. When an avatar of Kaine emerged, surrounding temperatures skyrocketed, air itself trembled, and every Aeldari within dozens of kilometers perceived the god's wrath. They fought with greater courage, demonstrated merciless brutality, abandoned death fear entirely. Kaine was not a beloved deity, yet he remained necessary. For within the grimdark cosmos, warfare proved inevitable, and the Aeldari, however elegant and refined, remained warriors. They comprehended killing. They carried within themselves Cain's eternal flame. This constituted the pantheon the Aeldari venerated. These were the gods they petitioned, whose narratives they recounted, whose likenesses they carved upon statuary and within temples. More importantly, this represented their self-understanding, for each deity symbolized a distinct aspect of Aeldari nature itself. Asurian embodied intellect and order. Isha represented nurturing and affection. Kurnus symbolized instinct and vitality. Lilith embodied hope and dreams. Morai Heg represented knowledge and destiny. Cain symbolized violence and strength. And all these elements, both radiance and shadow, existed within every single Aeldari. Within their creation mythology existed one additional legacy, a legacy not derived from the gods themselves, but inherited from those preceding, the Webway. Legend recounts that the Webway represented an ancient thoroughfare existing outside Warp's tempestuous chaos, a network of passages traversing space and time, evading the Immaterium's disorder. Who constructed it? The answer remains obscured. Certain accounts attribute it to the Old Ones. Others claim it formed naturally from reality's fundamental structure. Still others suggest the Webway simply existed eternally, predating all species. Yet, what none contested, the Aeldari learned mastering it. They did not merely utilize the Webway, they comprehended it, expanded it, maintained it, transformed it into their civilization's backbone. Through the Webway, they could travel between Craftworlds in mere hours rather than years. They could raid distant worlds requiring no warp vessels. They could conduct commerce, trading, warfare like dancers pirouetting across cosmic stages. The Webway explained why Aeldari Empire could expand without collapsing, why they could coordinate campaigns across thousands of worlds simultaneously, why nobody could besiege or isolate them. Yet, like everything else within Aeldari mythology, the Webway carried accompanying cost. For it was never truly theirs from Genesis. They merely served as caretakers. And when the fall descended, when Slaanesh was birthed in screams echoing across the galaxy, the Webway would be torn asunder. Safe passages would transform into lethal mazes. Ancient gateways would seal eternally, but that constitutes narrative for subsequent chapters. During the mythological epoch, when gods still walked amongst worlds, when Aeldari remained pure and ignorant of corruption, they believed themselves chosen, gifted with presence no other species possessed, prophetic talent perceiving futures, blazing souls touching the warp, the Webway permitting unrestricted travel, a pantheon to guide and protect. They were Starlight's children, and the stars had gifted them everything. Yet within each gift existed dangerous seeds. Prophetic capacity also represented unbearable burden. Blazing souls attracted entities within the warp's darkness. The Webway could be penetrated, could be destroyed. The pantheon, like all mythology, could be forgotten. And most perilously, conviction they were chosen, that they possessed exceptional status, that they transcended all other species. This arrogance, woven into their very creation mythology, would ultimately orchestrate their annihilation. For when a species believes itself incapable of falling, that precise moment marks their greatest vulnerability. These narratives were inscribed upon the most ancient wraithbone, sung throughout ritual ceremonies, danced by harlequins beneath countless worlds' moonlight. From aesthetics to warfare, from dreams to destiny, everything was embedded within the Aeldari's creation mythology itself. They were Starlight's children, born with blazing souls and keenly sharpened intellects, granted gifts they did not completely comprehend. And from those gifts, both magnificence and tragedy would subsequently flourish. For following mythology comes history. Following narrative arrives reality. And the Aeldari's reality would demonstrate that even Starlight's children could plunge into darkness itself. There are battles that no ordinary eye can see. Conflicts that unfold not merely upon the ground or amongst the stars, but within the very fabric of reality itself. Waves of warp energy ripple through space like concentric circles upon water, carrying with them the echoes of fear, hatred, and despair. And amidst these invisible storms, the Aeldari stand as warriors of both worlds. This is the legend of their role in the ancient wars. Not simply battles that can be recorded through statistics or tactics, but conflicts that shape their very nature, teaching them of power and peril, of glory and the price that must be paid. These stories have been passed down through generations, danced by harlequins in their silent performances, carved into ancient wraithbone. They are not truths that can be proven, but they are how the Aeldari understand themselves, why they fight in ways that no other race can, why they fear things that other species cannot see. According to legend, when the war in heaven still raged across the galaxy, the Aeldari were not merely ordinary warriors. They were weapons designed for a kind of war that metal and bullets could never win. The Necrons possessed immortal armies. The C'tan wielded godlike power. But both lacked one thing: souls. They could not touch the warp, could not sense the flow of psychic energy. And that was their weakness. The Old Ones, according to the versions the Aeldari tell, recognized this, and so they created, or at the very least uplifted, races with psyker abilities, capable of fighting on both fronts, physical and spiritual. And amongst those warriors, the Aeldari were the most refined, the most dangerous, the most perfect. They were the Moonlight Warriors, as legend still calls them. Not because they fought at night, but because the way they fought resembled moonlight itself. Elegant, cold, impossible to grasp. They emerged from the Webway, struck with terrifying speed, then vanished before their opponents could react. No noise, no waste, only absolute precision. But their true strength lay not in speed or technique. It lay in their psychic abilities. Whilst the Necrons fought like cold machines, the Aeldari fought like artists. They could sense the flow of battle through the warp, read their opponents' intentions before they acted. Their seers, the first prophets, stood within warp storms and glimpsed the future, guiding Aeldari armies along paths the enemy could never predict. They used wraithbone, material crystallized from psychic energy, to construct weapons, armor, and even colossal structures. The first Craftworlds, according to legend, were born during this period. Massive wraithbone cities drifting through space, simultaneously home and fortress, both work of art and weapon of war. Each Craftworld was a microcosm unto itself, where Aeldari warriors could rest, train, and prepare for the next battle. And when war called, entire Craftworlds could travel through the Webway, appearing anywhere in the galaxy. This was how the Aeldari fought, not through brute strength, but through absolute mobility, through superior psychic ability, through the art of war honed across thousands of battles. But war, as always, has consequences. And those consequences fell not only upon the ground or material worlds, they ate into the very structure of reality itself. The warp, once a relatively calm sea of psychic energy, began to seethe. Every death in war was a scream hurled into the immaterium. Every fear, every rage, every moment of despair made the warp increasingly chaotic. And from that chaos, things began to take form. Enslavers, the plague of souls, According to legend and secondary sources, these were primordial warp entities, born from the chaos of war. They had no fixed form, no clear nature, merely parasitic consciousnesses seeking weak souls to infiltrate and control. Enslavers did not fight with weapons. They fought by turning enemies into slaves. A psyker infiltrated by an enslaver would lose their will, becoming a puppet for the warp entity. And through that body, the enslaver could summon more of its kind, creating an unstoppable chain of infection. Races without strong psychic abilities, or without souls like the Necrons, were immune to this threat. But the races created by the Old Ones, races with brilliant souls and powerful psyker abilities, were extremely vulnerable. The Aeldari realized this sooner than anyone. They watched their allies, other races guided by the Old Ones, fall one by one before the enslavers. They saw once vibrant worlds become desolate, inhabited only by controlled corpses. They saw the warp, their source of power, become their greatest threat. And they learned the first lesson about the price of psychic power. It is a double-edged sword. Their brilliant souls were a gift, but also a torch attracting darkness in the warp. Psyker abilities helped them win wars, but also made them prime targets for enslavers and other warp entities. So, the Aeldari began to learn control. Not just control of their power, but control of emotions, of self, of soul. They realized that traditional martial arts were insufficient. There needed to be discipline, order, a way to protect the soul from warp infiltration. This was the foundation for what would later become the Path system, the system of paths that Craftworld Aeldari follow. Not born immediately, but the seeds were sown during this ancient war. They learned that emotions could not run rampant, that they could not be swept away by desire or rage without control, because to do so was to open the door to the warp, to invite entities like enslavers to infiltrate. And they learned to protect the Webway. The Webway, for all its safety, was not inviolable. Fierce wars had created tears in reality, and some of those tears touched the Webway itself. According to legend, there were sections of the ancient network that were damaged, where the boundary between Webway and warp became fragile. The Aeldari had to learn to repair these tears, to seal compromised gates, to move safely through the network without awakening things sleeping in dark corners. This was not a military skill. This was a survival skill. And from those experiences, the nature of the Aeldari was shaped. They were not merely warriors, they were psychic warriors. Those who fought with physical weapons and warp power, but always maintained balance between the two. Too much reliance on physical strength, they would become like other primitive races. Too much reliance on psychic power, they would be consumed by the warp. Their art of war reflected this. Every movement in combat was not just technique, it was a manifestation of perfect balance between body and mind, between physical and spiritual. Every campaign was not just tactics, it was coordination between seers who glimpsed the future, warriors who executed action, and the entire craft world as a living organism moving through the Webway. That was the legacy of ancient war. Not just victory or defeat, but lessons about their own nature. But with every lesson came hidden danger. Because when the Aeldari became so accomplished, when they mastered both physical and psychic warfare, when they commanded the Webway and no opponent remained strong enough to challenge them, they began to believe themselves invincible. That was the seed of hubris, of arrogance. Legend describes them as powerful, perfect, undefeatable, and for a long time that was truth. They won every battle, overcame every challenge, and gradually they forgot the lessons that ancient war had taught. They forgot that psychic power was a double-edged sword. They forgot that brilliant souls were also torches attracting darkness. They forgot that self-control was paramount, because when the ancient war subsided, when the old ones vanished, when the Necrons retreated into long sleep, when the C'tan were shattered, the Aeldari stood in an empty galaxy. No one remained strong enough to challenge them. No reason to remain austere, to control themselves, to fear. And that was when they began to build an empire. An empire not based on conquest through force, but on art, knowledge, and perfection. They had time, millions of years stretching before them. They had technology, legacy from the old ones, and their own wisdom. They had the Webway, a network allowing them to travel freely across the galaxy. And they had faith in themselves. Faith that they were the chosen race, that they were above all other living things, that they deserved everything the galaxy could bestow. But the question remained, hovering in the air like smoke after battle, when psychic weapons become commonplace, when war is no longer strange, when every enemy has been defeated, what civilization can keep its heart? When everything becomes easy, when there is nothing left to conquer, when every need is met, can discipline be maintained? Can lessons about self-control be remembered? Or would they forget? Would they let emotions run wild? Would they let desire lead the way? The legend of ancient war ends here, with the Aeldari standing in the galaxy as victors. But within that victory, a shadow crept, a danger they could not see. Because their most dangerous opponent was not the Necrons or C'tan, not enslavers or any warp entity. Their most dangerous opponent was themselves, their extremely emotional nature, their brilliant souls that, uncontrolled, could become flames consuming everything. And in the warp, where the emotions of trillions upon trillions of beings accumulated, something began to stir. Not yet born, but forming, waiting, hungering. The Aeldari, in their glory after victory, had no idea they had sown the seeds for their own greatest enemy. An enemy that would not come from without, but from within, from their very souls. But that is a story for later chapters. For now, let us follow the Aeldari as they enter their golden age, as they build the greatest empire the galaxy has ever seen, as they believe they have touched eternity. And from ancient war, they learned one final lesson, a lesson they would later forget at terrible cost. The greatest power is not strength, but the ability to control oneself. According to the songs and dances of the Aeldari, when the shadow of war finally receded, when the echoes of the most ancient battles subsided to whispers in the warp, the universe was inherited by the children of the stars. This is not history that can be proven through records or rigid chronicles, but a story told across thousands of generations, preserved in wraithbone memory, danced by harlequins beneath distant starlight. The story of the era when the Aeldari, having overcome unimaginable trials, stepped into the role that perhaps fate had intended for them from the beginning, the role of galactic rulers. Imagine that scene. A vast, endless galaxy stretching hundreds of thousands of light years. The old ones had vanished, leaving no trace beyond mysterious legacies. The Necrons slept peacefully in two worlds, deep beneath the surface of thousands of planets, awaiting the moment of awakening. The C'tan had been shattered into fragments, imprisoned in energy cages, or hiding in the darkest, most obscure corners of space. And in that void, the Aeldari stood, not through conquest, not through violence, but simply because they were the only ones remaining with technology sufficiently advanced, with knowledge sufficiently profound, with power sufficiently great to shape the galaxy. According to compiled sources and legend, the Aeldari Empire was once near supreme power in the material universe. Not An empire, in the sense of the Imperium, no rigid rule, no armies occupying each planet, no complex taxation or administrative mechanisms, but an empire in the cultural and spiritual sense. They expanded throughout space via the Webway. They shaped the art, philosophy, and science of countless worlds. Every other race, primitive beings slowly evolving on distant planets, looked upon the Aeldari as living gods. Some admired them, some envied them, but none dared challenge them. For how could one challenge those who could appear from thin air, fight like whirlwinds, then vanish without trace? How could one compete with those whose technology blurred the line between matter and spirit, between science and magic? There are no precise figures for the Aeldari Empire's scale. No one knows how many planets or star systems they controlled, but versions and legends all agree they were widespread, reaching every corner of the galaxy that starlight touched. And the backbone of that empire was the Webway. This ancient network, legend attributes it to the Old Ones or even more ancient powers, was the key to Aeldari's strength. The Webway was not merely a means of travel, it was the foundation of their entire civilization. Understand that the Webway is not like ordinary pathways. These are tunnels running through a separate dimensional space lying between material reality and the warp. Inside the Webway, there is no strange time distortion as in warp travel. No daemons lurking. No risk of being lost forever in the immaterium. An Aeldari could step through a Webway gate on a Craftworld at the far edge of the galaxy, walk through luminous corridors for a few hours, and step out on a world thousands of light years away, safe, swift, elegant. But the Webway was not just a tool. It was a symbol of Aeldari philosophy. For the warp, with all its power, is chaotic, unpredictable, dangerous. But the Webway is order imposed upon chaos, pathways carved through the immaterium. It represents the Aeldari ability, not to conquer the warp, but to live in harmony with it, to find a way through it without being consumed. And the Aeldari did not merely use the Webway, they expanded it. They repaired sections damaged from ancient wars. They created new branches, connecting more worlds. They transformed the Webway from a legacy of ancient gods into their own living creation. And alongside the Webway, they developed other psychic technologies that no race could match. Spirit stones, small but invaluable gems crafted from psychoconductive crystal. Each stone is linked to an Aeldari's soul from youth. When that person dies, the soul is drawn into it rather than drifting in the warp. During the Golden Age, spirit stones were not because of fear of Slaanesh, for Slaanesh did not yet exist, but because the Aeldari wished to preserve the knowledge, memories, and experience of their ancestors. They did not want masters of art, great warriors, profound philosophers to vanish completely upon death, and from those spirit stones they created the Infinity Circuit. The Infinity Circuit is a network of souls running throughout the entire Craftworld. Each Craftworld has its own Infinity Circuit, woven from wraithbone and psychic energy. When an Aeldari dies and their spirit stone is brought home, that stone is integrated into the Infinity Circuit, and the soul within, rather than disappearing, continues to exist. They no longer have physical bodies, but they still possess consciousness. They can still communicate with the living, still share knowledge, offer advice, even control Craftworld systems when necessary. The Infinity Circuit is how the Aeldari conquered death. Not by becoming immortal in physical form, but by transforming death into another stage of existence. And all of this was constructed from wraithbone. Wraithbone is not ordinary material. It is not mined from quarries or manufactured in smelters. It is born from the warp, crystallized by Bonesinger's Aeldari, with the special ability to sculpt psychic energy into matter. A Bonesinger sits in meditation, connects with the warp, and sings not with voice but with mind. And from that psychic song, Wraithbone begins to form. It grows like trees, flows like water, hardens into material white as bone, and gleaming like pearl. Wraithbone is simultaneously as hard as steel and as light as foam. It can withstand fire, withstand the pressure of space, withstand psyker attacks, but more importantly, it is living material. It carries within it the memory of its creator, can react to psychic energy, can be reshaped by Bonesingers later. Entire Craftworlds are constructed from Wraithbone, not by nailing or welding, but by growing according to the will of thousands of Bonesingers working together across centuries. Every tower, every corridor, every architectural vault is a work of art created through the fusion of mind and matter. This is why Aeldari technology and aesthetics cannot be separated, because for them these are not two separate things. A warship is not merely a military vessel, it is mobile sculpture, carved with the same meticulousness as a temple statue. A weapon is not merely a killing tool, it is a work of art, forged with the same devotion as a symphony. And the lives of the Aeldari during their golden age reflected this. They did not distinguish between labor and art, between work and creation. An Aeldari gardener did not merely plant trees, they created living gardens, where every tree, every flower, was arranged according to a complex aesthetic symphony. An Aeldari warrior did not merely kill enemies, they transformed war into dance. Every movement carrying meaning, every strike a painting. Material and spiritual life merged perfectly. They lived in Craftworlds beautiful beyond reality, surrounded by art from waking to sleeping. They need not worry about survival. Their technology met every material need. What they cared about was elevating the soul to new heights, experiencing life at a resolution no other race could imagine. According to legend, during that period, Aeldari souls were not threatened. They did not yet know of Slanesh's hunger, for Slanesh did not yet exist. When an Aeldari died, their spirit stone was brought to the Infinity Circuit, and the soul was safe within. No hell awaited, no eternal torment, only peaceful continuation beside ancestors. It was paradise, or very nearly so. But no paradise lasts forever, not in this universe. For within that very perfection, the seeds of collapse had been sown. When everything becomes too easy, when there are no more challenges, when there are no more enemies to fight, humans or Aeldari begin seeking something else, something novel, something more stimulating, something more dangerous. The Aeldari experienced emotions more intensely than any race. When they were happy to the point of weeping at the beauty of a flower. When they were sad to the point of sinking into darkness for years. Every experience for them was extreme. And during the Golden Age, when they had tried everything, when they had mastered every art, when they had climbed to the peak of every path of knowledge, they began seeking even more extreme experiences. Not because they were malicious, not because they wished to harm anyone, but simply because they were bored. And boredom, for a race so long-lived, so deeply feeling, is its own form of torture. According to legend, the Aeldari began to forget themselves, forgot the lessons ancient war had taught, forgot that emotions needed control, forgot that brilliant souls were also torches attracting darkness. They began falling into depraved habits. seeking pleasure, pushing emotions to the limit, experimenting with experiences previously considered forbidden. And in the warp, where every emotion leaves its mark, something began to take form. Not yet a god, not yet fully conscious, but gradually awakening, nourished by the emotions of trillions upon trillions of Aeldari, an entity that hungered for pleasure, hungered for extreme emotion, hungered for the brilliant souls of those creating it. The Aeldari, in the blazing light of their civilization zenith, had no idea they were nurturing their own enemy, that every moment of uncontrolled pleasure was a drop of blood feeding the demon growing in the shadows. And when it was finally born, the galaxy would shake, craftworlds would shatter, trillions upon trillions of souls would be torn apart, and the greatest empire ever to exist would collapse in a single night. But that remained the future. In the present of this story, the Aeldari still stood at the peak, still believed themselves invincible, still basked in the light before darkness consumed everything. And in that blazing light, the seed of damnation had been sown, only waiting for the moment to bloom. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Imagine a civilization where starlight is an instrument, where the void is canvas for painting, where life itself is a work of art. That was the Aeldari during their golden age. Massive craft worlds drifted through the galaxy like gleaming white pearls, each one a miniature city, a separate world carved from wraithbone. Light reflecting on their surfaces created eerie rainbows amidst the darkness of space. From a distance, they were beautiful beyond reality, like dreams made manifest. And within, the Aeldari lived as gods. According to legend, this was the era when they no longer distinguished between work and art, between war and dance, between science and poetry. An Aeldari warrior trained for centuries, not merely to become skilled, but to transform every movement into a perfect painting. A musician composed not merely to create beautiful sound, but to touch the listener's soul, making them weep or laugh or fall into meditative states with a single melody. They traveled through the Webway as easily as strolling through a park, waking on one craft world in the morning, setting foot on a distant world at midday to watch the sunset, returning home in the evening to sleep in rooms whose walls emitted gentle light in rhythm with their breathing. Life was a continuous flow of experience, each day an opportunity to discover something new, and their souls, brilliant, intense, full of vitality, knew no fear. Upon death, spirit stones would contain them. The infinity circuit would welcome them home. Ancestors would wait for them there. No hell, no torment, only continuation in peace. They dominated throughout the galaxy, not through armies or conquest, but through absolute presence. Other races, still primitive, still learning to craft tools, looked upon the Aeldari as creatures from dreams, and perhaps that was accurate. But dreams, however beautiful, can transform into nightmares, for when everything becomes too perfect, when there is nothing left to conquer, when every art has been mastered, every knowledge discovered, the Aeldari began to feel something they had never known. Emptiness. Not poverty, not suffering, but the emptiness born from having too much. When every need is met instantly, when there is nothing to strive for, life begins to lose meaning. And the Aeldari, with emotions 100 times more intense than humans, could not endure that emptiness. They began to seeking new experiences, emotions never before felt, pleasures never before tasted. In star sapphire palaces, in wraithbone concert halls, on stages amidst space, art began to change. No longer restrained elegance, but becoming bolder, more licentious, more dangerous. They pushed emotions to the limit, experimented with things previously considered forbidden, and with each step further down that path, the boundary between art and licentiousness, between experience and damnation, grew increasingly blurred. The very moment the Aeldari believed themselves immortal, believed themselves beyond all limits, the seeds of collapse were sown, and in the warp, something was listening, growing, hungering. A craft world drifted through the galaxy, silver light reflecting on its wraithbone surface. But upon closer inspection, there were small cracks, unclear where they came from, unclear when they began, just thin fracture lines, barely visible. But they were there, and they were spreading. They once dreamed they had touched eternity. They once believed their empire would exist forever, that their light would never be extinguished. But eternity has its price, and that price was about to be paid. End of Part 1. Origins. We have journeyed from the earliest days, from the war in heaven, when the Aeldari did not yet exist, through the mythic birth with the gods and Webway, through their role in ancient war, to when they inherited the galaxy and built the greatest empire the universe had ever known. We have seen them reach the pinnacle. We have seen their perfection, and we have seen the first cracks appear. But the true story has only just begun, for ahead lies the fall, the collapse, the most horrifying moment in galactic history, when a perfect race destroyed itself in a single night, when trillions upon trillions of souls were torn apart simultaneously, when Slaanesh, she who thirsts, was born from the very emotions and desires of the Aeldari, and afterwards the survivors would face the question, how does one continue living when all is lost? When every second, every minute, a god hungers for your soul? When death is no longer the end, but the beginning of eternal hell, they would split into many paths. Craftworlds would choose austerity, the Drukhari would choose cruelty, Exodites would choose simplicity, Harlequins would choose mystery, and the Inari would choose the final hope. Keep listening. Let the sound of rain lull you into dreams of the lost golden age. And when you wake, we shall step together into the fall, the moment the galaxy will never forget. If you're enjoying the story of the Aeldari, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the following chapters. Leave me a comment telling me what you think about the Eldar's golden age. Did they deserve to fall, or was it simply an unavoidable tragedy? I'll see you again in the fall.